Welcome. We'll wait just a second to allow everyone to join us. Hello, I'm Harmony Langford, the USBE Coach of Coaches, and I'm excited to welcome you to this year's first From the Science to the Classroom webinar. And who better to kick it off than Dr. Stephanie Stoller? I will be sending out a PDF and recording of today's presentation, as well as your certificate of attendance in a few days. If you have any questions for Dr. Stoller, please type them in the Q&A, and if we have time at the end, she will answer them for us, and she's planning to have time. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Dr. Stephanie Stoller, as she has dedicated over 30 years to improving literacy outcomes through evidence-based practices. She believes that by supporting all educators, high achievement is possible for every student. Dr. Stoller is the founder of Reading Science Academy, an online community where thousands of educators support each other to improve results in their classrooms. She also advises the next generation of education policy leaders in her role as an assistant professor at Mount St. Joseph University. In addition, Dr. Stoller serves as a board member of the Innovations in Education Consortium, sits on the executive team at the Evidence Advocacy Center, and is a co-founder of a national alliance for supporting reading science in higher education. Previously, she served as Vice President of Professional Learning at Acadience Learning, as an MTSS trainer and consultant for hundreds of school districts, including many in Utah, and as an assistant professor of school psychology and as a school psychologist. Through her ongoing educational workshops and extensive publications, Dr. Stoller continues to build the capacity of educators and education systems worldwide so that every student can be lifted through literacy. We are so grateful to have Dr. Stoller here today to share her expertise with us. Thank you, Dr. Stoller.
Thanks so much, Harmony, for that nice introduction. And thanks to everyone who is joining us today to do a little bit of a deep dive into Tier 1, Universal Reading Instruction. This topic is so important to me because of what we know in the reading research that is possible in terms of prevention and early intervention. So I'm going to be attempting to share with you MTSS as the framework within which we can do that reading improvement work that we're all engaged in. I'm going to be focusing on the universal tier, Tier 1, and focusing in on K-2 as primary prevention of reading failure. And along the way, we'll talk about older grades as well and intervention with older students. But my focus is going to be on prevention. And we'll be doing that with exploring the elements of effective Tier 1. I want to start by just sharing the definition of the science of reading that's in the defining guide. If you don't already have a copy of the defining guide, you should definitely go to the Reading League website. You can download a free PDF and see the full explanation of the science of reading. This is the definition that you can all be using in your schools. You can use it as a common denominator across the state so that everybody's thinking about the science of reading in the same way. The part that I highlighted at the end of the definition is where I'm going to be focusing in this presentation, that it's all about effective assessment and instruction for the purpose of improving reading outcomes. That's the bottom line. And we do that work through a system of prevention and intervention. That's what we call MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support. And some people don't understand that MTSS is actually part of the science of reading. They don't necessarily know that it's part of that defining guide. So I always like to show the page from that document so that you start to think about these things as related and not separate. Hopefully in your schools, you don't have different committees or teams working on things related to reading improvement that are separate from MTSS. Hopefully this is all under the same MTSS framework or umbrella. I want to start by just saying some general things that describe the multi-tiered systems of support framework. This is a model of continuous improvement, of school improvement. It is related to all students in your system, high performing and low performing. It's related to all aspects of student performance, not just reading. I'm going to be focusing on reading, but MTSS relates to all academic areas at all grade levels, and not just academic support for students, but also support around their social, emotional, and behavioral and mental health needs as well. It is a model of efficiency where we are using student data to build a system of increasingly intensive instructional supports so that we're not providing high intensive resources when a lower intensity form of support would have gotten the job done. So this is not putting up hurdles for students to jump through. It's not a different route to special education. It's a way of efficiently matching what do students need with the way that we operate and do business in schools so that 100% of our students reach our grade level reading outcomes. The only way we're going to get there is if we are very intentional with the first way we teach reading. So that's tier 1, what I think of as primary prevention of reading failure. In order to have the intensive resources that students with disabilities like dyslexia and other reading disabilities need and are entitled to, we can't have very many students who need intervention. And the way we get to a situation where not very many students need intervention is by having high quality first reading instruction. In some schools, your ELA block, your classroom reading instruction might need to look like intervention. We're going to talk about that. The goal is for 100% of your students to reach those minimum expectations on universal screening. And the place to start is having the first way you teach reading in general education cause roughly 80% of the students. Something like the vast majority of students need to get to those grade level expectations without any intervention, just with high quality first reading instruction. That's not all on the classroom teacher's shoulders. That is with support, and we're going to talk about how to make that happen. That reduces the number of students who need something additional, intervention, in addition to classroom reading instruction, to about 20%. And again, this is not set in stone. This is just a framework, a conceptual model. 20% is like manageable for most schools to provide intervention to. When you get above 20%, it starts to get very difficult to provide intervention that's effective to more than 20% of the population. And I define effective intervention as intervention that catches students up to grade level. That's the point. That's the goal of tier 2 and tier 3 intervention. So my image of the MTSS triangle is actually a 3-dimensional cone. At the base of the cone are those aspects of the school system that need to be analyzed, discussed, and have action plans written around so that you can build a tiered model that meets the needs of your students. So you need to have an assessment system, screening, diagnostic, progress monitoring, and outcome evaluation. You need to have tiered instruction and intervention. You're going to need to have professional development, ongoing learning and coaching, like you all are doing, for all members of the school community. And implementing this model requires leadership. It requires teams at all levels of the system. We'll talk a bit about that. And collaborative problem solving. I've got it shortened to CPS at the bottom of this image. The problem solving, database decision-making process that causes you, allows you, and supports you to build a tiered system of prevention and intervention. So before we focus in on tier 1, I just want to do a sort of quick introduction to the characteristics of each of the tiers to clarify some things that are common misunderstandings and set the stage for why we should focus on tier 1, because tier 2 and tier 3 are really, really hard work. So we don't want to have to do that with very many students. Okay, so descriptors of core reading instruction in tier 1, or what some people call universal reading instruction. They use the term universal because all students participate in tier 1. Students with disabilities, students who are English learners, students who are gifted. Tier 1 should be designed to meet the needs of all students within your system. The purpose of classroom reading instruction, the purpose of the ELA block, is to prevent reading difficulties, to get the vast majority of students to grade level reading expectations. You'll generally see people implementing something in the range of 90 to 120 minutes every single day. What you're doing during the time that you have is more important than the number of minutes that you have. So making sure that what we are now calling the science of reading is not reserved only for intervention times of the day, but that we are implementing evidence-aligned instruction in the first way we teach reading. Making sure that that classroom reading instruction is matched to the needs of the students, that it's highly differentiated for students at all points on the reading continuum, that might be sometimes teaching in whole group, other times teaching in small group, and what determines that is the needs of the students, and we're going to talk more about that. The tier 1 instruction is planned by grade level teams, or if you're in a very small school, a building leadership team, using primarily universal screening data. And you'll know if your tier 1 is effective if it causes the vast majority of students, roughly 80%, to reach your grade level reading expectations. Tier 1 instruction alone, no intervention, just the first way you teach reading, should be effective enough for the vast majority of students to reach grade level expectations. So hopefully this is giving you something to think about. Just a few descriptors about strategic reading instruction at tier 2. Some students are still going to need an extra dose, what we would think of as secondary prevention of reading failure, for the purpose of catching up, accelerating progress for students who are at risk or already struggling by giving them a second dose of that high quality instruction that they were getting in tier 1. So this is not students coming out of the ELA block to get their intervention, their speech therapy, their EL services, their title services. The tier 2 layer is meant to be an additional dose on top of, in addition to, the tier 1 instruction. It needs to be aligned to what's happening in tier 1. It could be exactly the same instructional package or program, just giving students more of it at tier 2 or tier 3. And because we're giving more resources to students who are at risk or struggling, we need more frequent progress monitoring so that we know very quickly if what we're doing isn't working. One of the great innovations of the MTSS model is that we don't have to plan intervention student by student. If we have good screening and diagnostic assessment data, we can do that planning as a grade level team. And we'll know if our tier 2 system of support is effective if it's closing the gap, if it's causing the vast majority of students who are getting tier 2 intervention to catch up to grade level. You might have noticed on my graphic on that image of the cone that the area between tier 2 and tier 3 is very blurred and shaded. For me, there's not a firm boundary between tier 2 and tier 3. Conceptually, fewer students should need intensive or tertiary prevention of reading failure, intensive intervention support. This would be increasing the intensity of the instruction that you're providing at tier 2 in ways like being in a smaller group, providing a longer dose of that intervention, perhaps having a more skilled instructor, or things like having a more narrow range of skills among the students who are in that group. And because this is the most intensive intervention that we provide, we definitely need frequent progress monitoring. This is where we're doing individual student planning. This is what makes tier 3 instruction so time and resource intensive, because this is where we are getting together as a group of professionals with the child's parent or family members, community members, to plan about that single individual student. We don't have to do that until we get to tier 3. And you'll know if your tier 3 intervention system is working if it causes the last 5% or so of students to reach the grade level expectations. Everybody gets to those minimum expectations, but what it takes to get them there will vary in intensity. That's what the tiered model, here's the image, that's what that tiered model is about. 100% of students get there, but what it takes to get them there varies. And it's the job of teams within the school to create the conditions, to design the system that will get students to those expectations. So we're doing a fairly good job in schools these days screening all students, but where we're going astray, I think, is that we're only using screening data to send students off to intervention, to make decisions about who gets intervention. And we're skipping over the very most important use of universal screening data, which is to evaluate the health and effectiveness of your classroom reading instruction at tier 1. It's the percentage of students who are on track or the percentage of students who are at risk, which is the key indicator here. You can see very clearly in these images that the needs at these two different schools are different. What tier 1 instruction should look like in these two different schools will be different. Screening data can help inform what your tier 1 instruction should look like. If you're in a context where there are more students who are struggling readers than not, more students would be going out of the classroom to get intervention than are left in the classroom, then your first step is to analyze what's happening in tier 1. Analyze and improve that classroom reading instruction. This is the problem solving that I don't see enough schools engaged in. This is best done as a grade level team. If you have, again, a small school, building level teams can be involved in this for each grade level within the system. But it's a process of identifying the difference between the desired situation, 100% of students on track, and the actual situation, only 17% of students are on track. Then moving into analyzing why that situation is the case and systematically prioritizing the potential reasons, collecting data on those potential reasons, and putting an action plan in place to change the hypothesized reason for the low performance. I'm listing just 5 possibilities here. In my experience, these are the 5 variables that when they are attended to and addressed and changed with action plans in schools, student reading performance improves. So I'm going to walk through an introduction to these 5 potential issues or reasons for low reading performance and give you some ideas and some things to think about as suggestions that you might make changes, areas that you might make changes in so that you get a different result for your students. This is not magic. This is not necessarily easy, but I just want to say that when you sit around maybe in the teacher's lounge or even with your own thoughts in your own mind in the evening, what are the roadblocks to getting better reading outcomes? You all have answers to that question. You know the things that could change in your system to improve outcomes for students. That's what this problem-solving process is all about. It's making those barriers public, talking about them in a team, and then systematically problem solving and working your way through them to eliminate those barriers so that you do get better outcomes. So these are the 5 areas that I'm just going to touch on so that your wheels can start turning. You might recognize some things about your school system in these comments. So number 1 is educator knowledge. One of the reasons why we don't have higher reading outcomes is because teachers and other educators have not been privy to what is in the reading research. And in fact, in some cases, teachers and other educators have been trained in information that's contradictory to what's in the reading research. And so this is what the science of reading movement is attempting to counteract and to change. And so my thinking about this is that we need a baseline level of knowledge that's common across all educators in a school. And I've got a picture of a refrigerator here. You might be wondering why, but that relates to my lack of knowledge when my refrigerator broke. I had absolutely zero background knowledge. I don't know how refrigerators work. Other than testing that the thing was plugged in, I had nothing. I did not know how to problem solve or troubleshoot because I didn't know how that system worked. When the technician showed up to come to the rescue, he had a series of questions that he asked about the refrigerator because he knows how that system works. That's what we want all educators to have as sort of a framework. How does reading work? What are the possible things that can go wrong? What does research say are the best ways to teach the essential skills? So that's why that refrigerator is there. A common base of knowledge that all educators can work from is what I have in mind. And central to that common base of knowledge is the simple view of reading. This started as a theory that now has been proven to be the case in more than 100 research studies, that reading comprehension is the product of word recognition and language comprehension. Not adding the two together, not teaching one and then next teaching the other, but simultaneously, explicitly teaching both domains to full capacity so that students will understand what they read. And nested within those components or domains of the simple view are the 5 essential literacy skills. These should serve as priorities for what we are teaching all students K-3. They are the essential non-negotiables that everybody has to acquire. And just to guard against thinking that we teach word recognition and then once students can decode, we shift our focus to language comprehension, I created this graphic to represent the fact that these domains have to be taught simultaneously in tandem, that they should be leveraged for the reciprocity across these domains, that yes, we can parse out the specific skills within each word recognition and language comprehension, but we get a better bang for our buck when we teach in an integrated way. The second component that I would encourage you to analyze if you are not getting most of your students to read at grade level with the first way you teach reading would be how you're using your time. And that includes just having a schedule that protects time for classroom reading instruction without interruptions, to have a schedule that allows flexible service delivery so that other adults can push in to that tier 1 instruction and support teachers and support students so that every student is in a group with an adult. So here's an example of how that schedule might play out. This is K-3 across the top. Don't pay attention to the detail of the time along the left-hand side. It's just meant to be a, for instance, kind of conceptual representation. In this school, they had a lot of students who were struggling with word recognition, and they decided to teach that aspect of tier 1 in skill-based flexible groups, as small as they could get them. So kindergarten taught the small group part of their tier 1 early on in the day. And they did their second dose of intervention, what they called win time, what I need time, their tier 2 or tier 3, later on in the afternoon. And first grade staggered the time when they taught the small group phonics lesson that was part of tier 1, and so did second grade, and so did third grade. So you can see that other adults in this system, special educators, the EL staff, the title staff, interventionists, coaches, school psychs, SLPs, all of the other folks in the school system could push in to help with that differentiation of tier 1. They could lead groups, and then they might also be available for the smaller proportion of students who needed an extra dose as tier 2 or tier 3 later in the day. So simply having a schedule mapped out that allows for that to happen is one way to increase your outcomes. Now, deciding what you're going to do during the time that you have is also part of scheduling. And here's where your screening data can help inform what should you be teaching, because your students don't yet know it. You can see that in your screening data. This is the kind of thing that helps people make decisions about, should we teach in whole group or in small group? So in an example like I was describing, where lots of students are struggling with word recognition skills, it might make sense to teach those aspects of tier 1, decoding, encoding, text reading fluency, and reading comprehension, in small, flexible, skill-based or homogeneous groups where every student is in a group with an adult. But it might make sense to teach the language comprehension components in whole group, heterogeneous whole groups, where you can take advantage of those positive peer language models, for instance. So being thoughtful, making a database decision based on your screening data, diagnostic data too, if you have it. What should we teach in whole group? What should we teach in small group during tier 1? Just because tier 1 is for all students doesn't mean all students necessarily get the same thing. This is an important consideration to keep in mind. I see a lot of schools that are implementing this idea of what I need time, this intervention block that they've carved out in the schedule, like the one that I showed you a couple of slides ago. The problem with that is tier 2 was never intended to be for everyone. We need to minimize the number of students who need tier 2 and tier 3 by getting instruction right the first time we teach reading in tier 1. So I see schools going to a lot of effort, doing really nice assessments, planful diagnostic assessments, really getting a good handle on what every student in the grade level needs in terms of reading instruction, and providing it in this intervention block that they're calling win time or tier 2, where they're really targeting instruction where everybody in the group has, as much as possible, the same skill deficit, giving that to students in a common block of time, 30 to 45 minutes, something like that. But the problem is, I see them trying to layer that on top of what I am now snarkily calling widen time, what I don't even need time, because all that thoughtful, careful diagnostic assessment work to uncover what does every first grader need is going out the window when people are doing all whole group classroom reading instruction. And they're expecting this little itty bitty 30 minutes of intervention to make up for spending 90 to 120 minutes in instruction that is either over the students' heads or something that they already know. And so I'm getting a little snarky about the way I'm talking about this to get people's attention, to get you to start thinking about how are you going to accelerate progress if you're only giving students 30 minutes of what they need? When you have this vast opportunity, 90 to 120 minutes in the schedule, where you could also give them what they need. So that's more in line with the way MTSS is designed. Give students what they need in Tier 1 and give them a second dose of what they need in Tier 2 or Tier 3. That's what's going to allow you to match instruction to where students are today and give them enough time in that carefully planned instruction so that their progress is accelerated and they actually catch up. So here's an image of making that happen, an illustration. Again, don't get lost in the details here. This is a conceptual representation, okay? So let's say we've got a series of 20 days of instruction, 1 through 20. And we have a group of students like student A who are ready for lesson 20 as designed out of the box, let's say, in the core reading program. Student A and others like them are lined up with whatever lesson 20 is about to teach, okay? But we also have in this grade level students like student B who do not have the prerequisites to access lesson 20. Their skills are somewhere else on the scope and sequence. And in my illustration, they're like at whatever lesson 1 would be working on. So they're behind in their skills currently. So the way we catch up students like student B is the double dose, the stacking on of learning opportunities in the tiered model. So it might look something like student B is going to get lesson 1 in this instructional program on day 1 in the tier 1 time of the schedule. And in the tier 2 time, they're going to get lesson 2, same day. So 2 lessons on each day. The second day, they're going to get lesson 3 during the tier 1 time and lesson 4 during tier 2 or tier 3 time. And on the third day, they're going to get lesson 5 during tier 1 and lesson 6 during tier 2 or 3. Over the course of 20 days, student B and student A will come together. They are both ready now to move on to lesson 40. This is the stacking on, the layering on of double dosing instruction for students so that we either leave first grade with everybody reading for meaning, reading at grade level, or we catch up those older struggling readers by accelerating their progress through the scope and sequence with multiple opportunities to access instruction at their level within the school day. So it probably goes without saying to a group that's this knowledgeable that what we are doing during these doses of instruction is lined up to the research. And research is very clear that explicit and systematic instruction is more effective for novice and struggling readers. This has been tested over and over again, more effective than discovery learning, problem-based learning, inquiry learning, constructivist approaches to reading instruction. Time and time again, when the two types of instruction are compared, explicit instruction wins out every time. So looking for those elements of explicit instruction, not just in intervention, but in tier 1, building in the elements of explicit instruction into the first way you teach reading, making it errorless learning so that students learn these skills the first time around and we don't need so much intervention. Leaving nothing to chance, errorless learning. That's what we need for beginning and struggling readers. So here are a couple of examples of instructional routines that illustrate the elements of explicit instruction. This is one for the word recognition skills, and here's an example for language comprehension skills. This one is for vocabulary. Okay, so I want to go back to the last elements of my list of 5. So that included educator knowledge was first, the schedule was second, explicit instruction is the third thing to consider. Are you delivering evidence-based instruction in tier 1? And then the last 2 I'm going to sort of address together. And that's grouping practices and flexible service delivery. So let's pretend you're in a school like the one I've been using as an example, where not very many students are on track when you do screening. More students are at risk than not at risk. So how are you going to use the time that you have and the people you have to support a more effective, more aligned to the students' tier 1 system? So in this school, they had 90 minutes for tier 1 instruction, and they chose to use 45 minutes in a whole group format to teach language comprehension. So that included all their oral language and listening comprehension goals, their vocabulary and content knowledge goals, and their writing instruction, which was linked to that read aloud. All of these goals were accomplished through very intentional reading aloud and prompting conversation in a whole group format. That left them the other 45 minutes to teach the word recognition skills, phonemic awareness, encoding and decoding, text reading fluency, and reading comprehension. All of those skills were taught in differentiated groups. I usually use the term small group as kind of a shorthand, but you can see here when I blow this up larger, some groups are not small. So I need a better descriptor, but they are skill-based groups. They are targeted to the actual skills that students need to learn next. They are flexible, so students are not necessarily in these groups the entire year. They are definitely not in these groups all day, so it's not tracking. But the idea is that the grade level would identify their human resources and group students according to skill, not according to homeroom class. So in this illustration, students are coming out of 4 different first grades to go into the groups that match their skills, what they need to learn next. So there were 18 students across the 4 different first grade classrooms who needed to work on learning to read CVC words. And because this was the lowest performing group, there were 4 adults, 2 classroom teachers, and 2 paras who were assigned to those 18 students. So those 18 students were divided up among 4 adults. And at the other end of the continuum, 33 students who were the highest performing in the grade level, they were working on text reading fluency and reading comprehension, and they were all 33 of them with just 1 teacher. So this is an illustration of flexibly targeting your human resources to meet the needs of the students. This is, again, something that many people are doing as part of their intervention time, their win time. I'm finding that that's not sufficient for catching students up. So one of the things that schools are doing that I'm working with is implementing this approach during tier 1 so that some students are getting 2 doses of that small group targeted instruction each day, one during tier 1 and the other one at another time of day as their tier 2 or tier 3. So it's an all hands on deck approach. Every student in the grade level is considered and put into the appropriate group as close as you can possibly get it, given the number of adults that you have. Okay, let me wrap up and see what questions are floating around out there. Tier 1 is an opportunity for risk reduction. You can minimize the number of students who need intervention if you teach it right the first time around. Intervention can't be very effective if too many students need intervention. We end up diluting the intervention so thin that it can't possibly do its job, which is accelerating progress and catching students up to grade level. Intervention is going to be most effective when it's in addition to, not instead of, effective classroom reading instruction. We can't expect the intervention system to counteract or make up for what's going on in classroom reading instruction. But we can use the screening data that we're already collecting to identify and inform what our tier 1 system of instruction should look like. It's the problem-solving process in teams at the building level and the grade level that allow us to build that effective tier 1 system. Whatever you think are the barriers to getting better reading outcomes, those are exactly the issues that go into problem analysis. I just focused on 5 that I find to be most commonly the issues related to not getting more students on track. There could be other barriers. You could have very transient population. You could have transient staff. You could be missing staff. My point is, whatever you would say are the, what I call yes buts. You know, you're listening to this presentation, it all sounds great. Yeah, but ... fill in the blank. Whatever it is you're thinking, that's not an excuse. That's exactly what your team needs to problem solve around. That's your reality. It's not going to go away with waving a magic wand, but the process for resolving whatever that barrier or issue is the heart of MTSS. That's exactly what that school improvement work is all about. Okay, hopefully I gave you some things to think about, and let's get some questions so we can clarify anything that I was not clear about. So, okay.
Absolutely. Thank you. This has been wonderful. We do have a few questions, and a couple of them came early on, so you might have answered them as you continued through your presentation, but let's just make sure that our participants are clear.
Yep.
So one question we have is that if we have students needing content that is off grade level, like a second grader who still needs to learn letters and sounds, is that still considered tier 1, or would that be tier 2? Can you help define the difference between those tiers as far as grade
Yes.
level expectations?
Yes, it would be tier 1. Tier 1 should match where your students are. So tier 1 for that second grader who still is learning letters and sounds needs to include instruction on learning letters and sounds so that they can read second grade text for meaning. So the second grade standards are probably a little bit of advanced decoding, but mostly focused on reading comprehension. And the path to get to reading comprehension starts with phonemic awareness and phonics. So if you have a second grader who's struggling with second grade reading comprehension, you will see that on the universal screening. They won't be able to read the second grade text for meaning. So you know right then and there, that's not a good use of their time in tier 1. So alternatively, you can provide instruction on letter sound relationships, reading CVC words to that second grader during tier 1 in service of getting them to the second grade standards about reading comprehension. Does that make sense? Are there follow-up questions to that?
So this one is very similar. So on this one, their school is following the structured literacy lessons designed by the program that they're in, but over half of their students failed to test proficiently in blending CVC words. So this is a second grade class that more than half can't blend CVC words.
Mhm.
So this question in similar, should they have the students read decodable passages with the grade level scope and sequence sound spelling, or should they use decodable passages at the level students are at?
Well, gosh, what do you think? I mean, it just seems like such a common sense, like, okay, there's a lot of patterns beyond CVC in grade level, second grade level text, like the passages that come with the, if it's some kind of a program, there's a lot of patterns beyond CVC. This student can't read CVC. Is it a good use of their time to be asked to independently read or to be scaffolded or dragged through reading that second grade text? Is that the best use of their time? I don't think so. I think it would be a better use of their time to teach them to read CVC words and teach them to understand complex text through having it read aloud to them. So not just the second grade text that's in the program, but what the teacher should be reading aloud for knowledge building, for explicitly teaching inferencing skills, for explicitly teaching about complex English syntax, academic language. All of that is happening simultaneously through read aloud while we are meeting the student where they currently are in the word recognition domain and teaching them to read CVC words for the goal of second grade reading comprehension. So this is where the idea of the double dosing, the lining up of what happens in tier 1 with what's happening in intervention, so that students are getting more of their minutes each day spent at the skill that they need to work on, so they quickly as possible, accelerate through that scope and sequence from CVC words all the way to multisyllable decoding, and they catch up to the second grade curriculum and standards. Now,
Thank you.
somehow all of this common sense has become extremely controversial. I don't know why. I'm chuckling because I don't know where we went so astray. It seems like such common sense to me. It seems like the most basic, equitable, give students what they need approach. Everything we've ever known about reading intervention starts with finding out where the student is on a scope and sequence and beginning their instruction at that point, not teaching over their head. So there we are.
Thank you. And I think that maybe some confusion comes from we've encouraged our teachers to not water down complex grade level text for students, but as you heard Dr. Stoller address, our comprehension strand of the rope is being addressed with that grade level content that we would scaffold students with.
That's the distinction. Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay. So another question is just, and I think this is probably a common concern. Many of our school systems think of tier 1 as something that every student receives at the same time, no matter where the kids are, they're getting the same thing. Your examples make sense, but do you have any suggestions for helping communicate and organize a system like this?
So a very, definitionally, tier 1 is highly differentiated. Like that's from the start, the only way I've ever understood it is that the reason to do universal screening is to find out where students are so you can design the right tier 1 for them. We shouldn't be trying to fit students into an existing program. We need to build the program that meets the needs of the students. Will you reiterate the question, because I got off on a little tangent there and there was something else I wanted to add. Thanks.
So just because so many systems don't view tier 1 that way, what's your advice for communicating that and organizing a system like that?
Yeah, thank you. So again, it comes back to the team. This is the job of the grade level team. So if you don't have a team or you have something called a PLC, but they're not talking about this, well, that's a first step, right? And so in that grade level team, a really practical strategy here is to lay out the needs of the students. Like lay it out, write it on index cards if you have to. Visually show to everybody in the grade level and your principal, if we sorted kids into groups, like we chunked them together into buckets, this is how it lays out for our grade level. And then open the teacher's manual to whatever lesson is supposed to be taught tomorrow and identify for whom is this a match. And everybody for whom it's not a match, why would we do that thing tomorrow? if students don't have the prerequisites to make good use of that. So just laying out visually, demonstrating the gap between what's in that core program and what students need at a very practical level, showing how that's a mismatch. That if we spent time matched up to teaching what students need, we'd be able to accelerate their progress. If we are mismatched, if students are being asked to relearn something they already know, they're likely to shut down. And if students are asked to be doing something that is too hard for them, they don't have the prerequisites to do it, they're likely to act out. So any teacher who's tried to teach a whole group lesson in the context that you described, half of the students are below grade level, has experienced check out and act out, right? Like, and lots of other not great things. There's not a lot of learning happening in that environment. So I think it's a matter of demonstrating very plainly the misalignment between what's in that core program, how it's not an appropriate match for everybody in the grade level.
Thank you. And then we have another question about how are teachers able to teach that many different lessons based on student need during tier 1, 2, and during tier 1 time. And I'm wondering if that's, where's the manpower coming from?
Teachers are only teaching one lesson.
Mhm. So the manpower to get those groups, I know you've had some good suggestions for that in the past.
Yeah, so using the manpower that you have differently. Again, this is a team conversation. This conversation has to happen at the grade level and the building level. So you have other adults who serve your grade level. You're just using them in a different way than what I'm suggesting. This will perhaps take some trust building. It will perhaps take some changing the schedule so that there's common planning time. Whatever it might, whatever the barriers might be in your setting, you're going to have to work through that. This won't necessarily be something you can jump into tomorrow, but teachers should not have to plan for multiple small groups. And teachers should not be with a small group while the rest of the class is, doing whatever the rest of the class does when the teacher's with a small group, which is usually not a lot of learning. So this is the alternative to that. So every student is in a group with an adult, and the classroom teacher is planning for and delivering one small group. So say you are this classroom teacher, your classroom teacher number 1, you are only planning for this small group during tier 1 time. When this is implemented, it shrinks the number of students who need intervention at tier 2 or tier 3. And it frees up the special educators, the EL staff, the intervention teachers to give the tier 2 or tier 3 to the small proportion of students who need it.
Thank you. And then lastly, do you have any books or other resources you could recommend that our coaches and teachers could read to support them in learning more about this?
Yes, I have a list of them. Top on the list would be Effective Universal Instruction by Gibbons, Brown, and Niebling. The Reading League chapters in each state, well, not every state, but many states, hosted a book study that I sponsored last summer. And all of that information is collected in a Padlet. It was so well designed. There's videos with the book authors. There are discussion questions and lots of resources on that Padlet. And if you're not sure where to find it, I'd be happy to send that to you. Effective Universal Instruction is my number 1 suggestion. There's a really nice book by Dawn Miller and Amy McCart. I'm just looking on my bookshelf to make sure I get the name right. I think it's called Supporting Equity-Based MTSS. If you Google Miller and McCart, or McCart and Miller, equity-based MTSS will pop up. There are a couple of other books that are a little bit more textbooky. They're newer books. And I know I'm going to botch the names. So one is by John Potter and Jason Harlacher, and there's a third author I'm not thinking of, but it's called Untangling Database Decision Making. Excellent text on the type of problem solving and what you do in teams. Lots of templates, lots of guidance about that piece of doing systems change and school improvement. It's an excellent resource. And very similar is a book by Rachel Lossoff, Lossoff, and Kelly Brocksterman. And it is called Transforming Something. Transforming is the first word. It's the only one I can see on the spine. Those are my top picks for books about MTSS. And the last three that I mentioned, all except for the Gibbons, Brown, and Niebling book, are about MTSS generally, not just about reading and not even just about academics. So they give you the full integrated model, including behavioral supports as well.
Thank you. That is so helpful. And I love it that we're so eager to learn more always. And that's why we have these webinars here.
That's why I love Utah educators. You guys are the best.
We do too. They are wonderful. So thank you so much, Dr. Stoller, for everything that you have taught us to help us improve reading outcomes for all Utah students. This has been an absolutely wonderful hour. I'd like to remind our participants that next month's webinar will be on November 20th, also at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and will feature Terry Noland, who will share with us how we can lead from where we are and ignite literacy transformation in our schools. And if you're here today, you're already registered for that one, so please join us. Again, I'll be sending out attendance certificates as well as the recording, so you can go back and review what Stephanie said, as well as a PDF of her presentation in a few days. Thanks so much for joining us, and please enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.